If you want to join the US military, then you have to take a test to make sure that you have some basic knowledge and make sure you qualify for the US military. Most people know this test as the ASVAB, but there is also another one called the PiCAT. You may not know this, but most people actually take the PiCAT and not the ASVAB. So you probably want to know what is the difference between the two tests, the PiCAT and the ASVAB. So let me break that down for you. Both the ASVAB and the PiCAT contain 145 multiple choice questions when taking the computer version of the test. The questions are basically the same, so if you're studying for the ASVAB, then you should be just fine. Now, there is no paper version of the PiCAT, only a computer version, but if you take the paper version of the ASVAB, then you have more questions with 225 questions on the paper version of the ASVAB. So while I mentioned that the questions are essentially the same on both tests, let me tell you about a few things that are different between the ASVAB and the PiCAT. The ASVAB is a proctored test. That means you're going to have to take the test in front of some officials. They're going to be observing you take the test to make sure that you're not cheating. On the ASVAB, you have 2.5 hours to complete that test. Otherwise, you're cut off if you haven't finished it in that allotted time. Now, as I mentioned earlier, you will most likely take what is called the PiCAT instead of the ASVAB, which is good because the PiCAT is not proctored, which means that you don't have people observing you taking it, and it's also not timed. Now, it's not officially timed like the ASVAB is, where you have 2.5 hours type of thing. You do still have like a 48-hour time limit as far as like the recruiter assigns it to you or whatever. You have to complete it in 48 hours, but not the same kind of timed type of test like the ASVAB is. But since the PiCAT is not proctored, that means you take the test from your computer at home. Now, some people might think that, well, that allows people to be able to cheat and be able to have someone else take the test for them, or even Google search the answers. Well, there is a verification test that you'll have to take. That verification test will be taken at MEPS, and it is a 30-minute test. If you're not familiar with what MEPS is, that's essentially where you go to do all your physicals and everything else you got to do before you join the military and before you sign your contract. But if you did the PiCAT, you're going to have to take a 30-minute verification test at MEPS. That verification test contains 30 questions you have to do within 30 minutes. And that verification test is basically just to check to make sure you didn't cheat, because that verification test is actually proctored. So that means there is going to be someone there to observe you taking that test. The verification test includes questions that came from the PiCAT. So if you knew how to answer them when you took it at home, then you should know how to answer those same questions when you take that verification test at MEPS. Now, if you fail that verification test, though, they will then have you take the ASVAB. So then you have to go back to the proctored one, that 2.5 hour time limit type of thing. You won't get the luxury of being able to take the test at home. So if you take the PiCAT at home, pass it, but fail a verification test, now you gotta take the ASVAB. Now, this information can also be found over on my website over at ChristopherChaos.com, but let's talk about the subjects that are on the ASVAB as well as the PiCAT. So if we're looking at it over here on my website, we've got the subjects that I outlined here for what's on the ASVAB as well as the PiCAT. You have subjects for general science, arithmetic reasoning, word knowledge, paragraph comprehension, mathematics knowledge, electronic information, auto and shop information, mechanical comprehension, assembling objects, and verbal expression. How you do on these subjects will calculate your Armed Forces Qualification Test scores, otherwise known as your AFQT, and what is known as your line scores. The AFQT will determine if you qualify for the US military. So all branches of service require at least an AFQT score of 31 or better, with the exception of the Coast Guard, as they require a 36 or better. Earlier, I was talking about the subjects that are on the ASVAB as well as the PiCAT. Well, that AFQT score is going to come from some of those subjects as far as how well you did on them. The specific subjects that AFQT score comes from is from arithmetic reasoning, mathematics knowledge, paragraph comprehension, and word knowledge. So those subjects are not the only important areas that you want to make sure to focus on, because all subjects will be able to give you those line scores, and those line scores are important to determine what job you qualify in the United States military. As an example, on the Army side, if you are someone that wants to join the Army as an 11 Bravo, which is an infantryman, that requires at least a minimum score of 77 in the combat section, which is calculated from how well you do on verbal expression, auto and shop, and mechanical comprehension. Some jobs in the Army will actually require a minimum score in more than one section. For example, if you want to be a parachute rigger, which is a 92 Romeo in the United States Army, that requires an 88 in general maintenance and an 87 in combat. If you head over to my website, you can see all the different score topics and what subjects are used to give you the overall score for that section. So that way, if you're trying to figure out, what MOS you want to do, and you got to see that it requires this area, you can see which subjects in the ASVAB is going to create like that combat section, that mechanical section, whatever the case is. So ideally, you want an AFQT score of above 36 so that you can join any branch you want to join. And when it comes to your line scores, well, you want to do your research to figure out which line scores is going to matter for the job you want. But I highly recommend just trying to do it as best as you can. That way, even though you may qualify for the job that you want because you meet those standards and those line scores, that job may not be available. And if you have a backup job that you want to do, and hopefully you scored well enough on the entire ASVAB or the entire PiCAT to be able to really kind of just choose something that you still want to do as a backup. If you're specifically interested in the United States Army, well, that's mainly what I focus on this channel, so make sure you're subscribed. But I also recently did a video talking about the minimum requirements to join the United States Army. If you want to check out that video, if you haven't seen it already, get it right there. So you can check it out, watch that video there. Check out my links down in the description box down below. Follow me on social media. I'm Christopher Chaos. I'll see you next time. See ya.